All right, so as you guys know, this month we're dealing with wilderness wisdom. And last week, our sister blessed us with a great lesson on I don't even know how to pronounce her name. Is it Hagar? You know what I'm saying? Because it's Egyptian, is it Hebrew? But she gave us a wonderful lesson. Had me really reevaluate some things about God seeing me in those spaces where I believe people may not see me. And so she started this off with that wilderness story. And so I've been given the task to talk about Moses, and his wisdom, or the wisdom that we see in Moses' story as it pertains to the wilderness. Moses, ironically, has two wilderness moments, but we're going to focus in on the first wilderness moment that prepared him for life with the sheep that he would be dealing with later in his life. So the actual text that we're going to be focused in on are chapters 3 and 4, ending at verse 17 on chapter 4. I'm not going to read all that, but before I get to chapter 3, I have to give you guys some context of what's going on in Moses' life. I know you guys are going to Sunday school. I know you guys are going to Wednesday night, Tuesday night, Thursday night Bible study, and that you guys know this story. But there's some things that we have to, in order to get us to the place where we're going to talk about this wilderness moment, we have to ask ourselves a question. How did we get here? How did Moses get here? And so in the mind of Moses, how did I get here? And so just starting off with the story about Moses, we know in Exodus chapter 1 that the Egyptians had a new Pharaoh, right? And then this new Pharaoh coming in, he didn't know Joseph. And we know that Joseph gave the Egyptians a great wealth of prosperity. He really did a lot for the Pharaoh, and he did a lot for the kingdom and the kingdom surrounding Egypt, right? And so this new Pharaoh, he didn't know Joseph, but what he did see, he saw that the Hebrews were growing and that they were a mighty nation, at least in number. He didn't know about their fighting skills, but he assumed some things about them based off of the number of people that he saw in the part of the Egypt that they were at. And so he sees that what the Hebrews are growing, and he's like, look, we better do something about this before they grow and they join up with our enemies and they take over our land. And so he comes up with this idea of, doing harsh labor, having them perform harsh labor. And he also comes up with the idea of having the firstborn male tossed into or killed, right? And so he wanted them to be tossed into the water to be eaten by alligators or whatever the case may be. So Moses comes along around this time. And so Moses is born in chapter 2 of Exodus. And as Moses is born in chapter 2 of Exodus, we know that the Egyptians are now enslaving the Hebrews, and that the Pharaoh wants Moses as a male child to be killed. And so what Moses' mother and sister do, they devise a plan to put Moses in the water. But this comes about because when Moses' mom looked at Moses, she saw something in him, right? As a child, she saw there was something about him. She said that he was a beautiful child, right? And this word for beautiful wasn't necessarily that he was handsome. It was that he had something about himself. He had an appearance about himself that made him noteworthy, right? And so they decided to, for the first 6 months, to hold him at bay until they couldn't anymore. Threw him in the water. Well, they didn't just throw him in the water. They put him in a basket, put him in the water near where the Pharaoh's granddaughter. Scholars have different ideas about that. So threw him in the water, and then the Pharaoh's daughter, you know the story. Pharaoh's daughter grabs him out the water, and so now he's in the Pharaoh's house, right? He's in the Pharaoh's house, and he's raised as a king's kid. So Moses now is raised as a king's kid. He's in the Pharaoh's house. We talk about his mom and the fact that his mom was hired to raise him. And just a tidbit that's not in the text that we don't see, but being that his mom raised him, and then seeing what Moses did subsequently later on, we know that his mom must have laced him up with who he really was. She must have told him some things about himself. She must have had some ideas about who he was supposed to be and what he was supposed to do for the children of Israel, because he did not let that go when he saw what happened later on, when he saw what happened later on in the story. And so Moses, growing up, growing up as a king's kid, we got to unpack that a little bit. That means he had privilege. Moses grew up with privilege. He grew up with education. He grew up with the finer things. He grew up with clean hands. He grew up with a proverbial silver spoon in his mouth. Moses had a good life, right? And so Moses, with all this good life and all these privileges that he had, he still knew who he was. So one day, we know the story. He's out and about, and he sees an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew. And so, these privileged people, man, look, if you know any privileged people, man, help them to stay privileged. Help them to understand that their privilege is a gift. It don't have to be a curse, right? So he's privileged, but he want to go with the slaves. I mean, I know that's how, us woke folk are, man. Like, I got all this. I want to go to the streets. I want to be in the hood. I want to be gangster with it, right? Because that's kind of what Moses did. He wanted to identify more with the Hebrews by doing whatever he did. And what he did end up doing was he killed the Egyptian, right? He killed the Egyptian and he buried him, right? Moses wasn't a killer, but I guess he said, I ain't no killer, but don't push me. So, Moses, he kills the dude, thinks he does it in the dark, but not so fast. The next day he comes out and the two Hebrews are arguing. I have a whole lesson on that too. Like, you try to save some people, and next thing you know, you go back to the spot, they still at each other's head. You're trying to help them to level up. Anyways, he tries to keep these two Hebrews from fighting each other, and then they expose him. They say, look, man, we saw what you did. Man, you're a murderer. We saw what you did to that Egyptian. You're a murderer. And this is how Moses begins his wilderness moment. The reason why I want to unpack that is because his first 40 years of life was a life of privilege. That was a part of his journey, though. That was a part of who he needed to be. He needed those first 40 years, but those first 40 years wasn't going to develop him to be the person that God needed him to be. Sometimes we get all these privileges. Sometimes we grow up in the church and we know all the scriptures and we know all the tenets of the church and we know all the doctrine and we got all the lingo down and we got all these privileges and we know, how to walk, how to talk, how to do these things and we don't have any issues, right, in life. But then when the issues of life come, we fold because we don't embrace our wilderness moments. So now we meet Moses in his wilderness moment in chapter 3. So Moses now here goes my list, all right? Moses is now in chapter 3. He leaves, he breaks out because of what he's done. He became a murderer, so he left, right? He left what God had allowed him to grow up in, and then he goes into the wilderness. Mind you, this wilderness experience was necessary. Him going into the wilderness is something that he needed to do. Maybe it wasn't something that he chose, that he really wanted to do, but it was something I believe that was divinely ordained by God. That God didn't want him to necessarily murder the guy, but God needed him to go to this wilderness because 40 years later, the same wilderness would be the wilderness that he would take the children of Israel through. And that's not my lesson for this week, but that is a part of his wilderness moments. And so Moses is now in the wilderness, and as he's going to the wilderness, there's a few things that we learned about Moses in this wilderness. Moses finds his bride in the wilderness. I'm just going to unpack the story. I'm not going to, y'all know me, I don't have no points and all that kind of stuff. I just kind of talk through and then we pull out some things in the story. And so, Moses finds his wife in his wilderness. All right. A lot of times we think about wilderness, you think about, being alone. It's my wilderness moment. And so, it seems like it's a bad place to be in the wilderness, right? And so he walks in the wilderness. As he's walking in the wilderness, he's finding purpose in the wilderness. He's not going to allow this wilderness moment to not allow him to grow. So he grows in the wilderness. He didn't have a wife in Egypt. He didn't get his wife until he was after 40 years old. Somebody, I know y'all want to be married at 30 and have 3 kids and a house and all that kind of stuff. After 40 years of being in privilege, having a nice house, having all that he needed, he went to the wilderness. He didn't have nothing. He didn't have anything. And he found his wife, right? So he finds his wife in the wilderness. he also finds purpose, his purpose in the wilderness, right? He finds his bride, finds purpose. How do I know he finds purpose? Well, in the wilderness, where he meets Jethro, who will become his father-in-law, he learns how to be a shepherd. If you know anything about the Hebrews, they were shepherding people already. But Moses, remember, he grew up privileged. He didn't get his hands dirty. He didn't know anything about sheep. He didn't know anything about being a nomad. He didn't know anything about being a wanderer, right? So he had to learn how to lead the people that he was going to be able to lead, but he had to do that in the wilderness. Now, mind you, he didn't know what God was setting him up for. A lot of times when we're in our wilderness, we think that, it's a bad place to be. But the wilderness is an opportunity for God to sharpen you and shape you in order to prepare you for what he has for you. Moses, I'm quite sure Moses thought he's going to stay in the palace, and he was going to keep eating from the king's table, and he was going to have I'm quite sure that's what he thought, but God said, no, not so fast, playboy, not so fast. So while he's in his wilderness, he finds his bride, he finds his purpose. And after he finds his purpose, it wasn't till 40 years of being in the wilderness, his own wilderness by himself, that God shows up with the burning bush. So it took him 40 years to get in place and on purpose for what God had for him. But that was all in his wilderness. The wilderness is full of experiences that you have to make sure that every step that you take, I think I did a Facebook post about this, every step you take in your wilderness, every step, every terrain you touch on is necessary. You may not understand it. You may not understand why you took the job that you took. You may not understand why you had this failed relationship. Like that failed relationship is not going to identify, not going to be your identity, but that failed relationship has its fingerprints on your life. You may not understand why it failed, but you will understand it once you get to the place that you're ready to walk in purpose. And so in chapter 3, when Moses has already been in the wilderness for 40 years, we don't talk too much about his wilderness experience, but we do know that he was a shepherd. And we do know that he lived in the household of a Midian priest. So it's more than likely that he became also a Midian priest because of the household he lived under. So he wasn't even close to God in this moment. You understand what I'm saying? Like, he wasn't in the right relationship with God. He was really outside of where he was supposed to be, but God was building him up for where he needed to go back to. And so, God, the burning bush, y'all know the whole story, bro. The burning bush, Moses is doing his thing. Moses is minding his business. Moses is not trying to be the savior. Moses is not trying to be the hero. Moses got a baby mama and 2 kids. Moses is chilling. He's cool being in the wilderness. He understands the terrain in the wilderness. He understands the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, in the wilderness. He understands where the enemies is, and he understands where to go and where not to go in the wilderness. He is comfortable in the wilderness, but as soon as he gets comfortable, God gonna throw a burning bush on him. He threw that burning bush on him to get his attention. A bush burning in the middle of the desert, pretty much, where there's and it's not burning up, and there's no water to put it out. It's going to grab your attention. So God grabs Moses' attention. My question for us, just to ponder as we're in, some of us are in wilderness moments right now. Are we paying attention when God tries to grab our attention by certain things, or do we overlook those things and say, well, oh, that's odd, that's strange, and keep going? Pay attention. When God is trying to get your attention, turn, look, and pay attention and say, yes, Lord. And so, so now God and Moses have this conversation. And as they're having this conversation, God is saying, look, let my children know. Let the children of Israel know that I have heard their cries. Man, 40 years, 80 years, not even 40, 80 years prior, they was killing the babies. They were trying to kill the babies, the little baby boys. The new Pharaoh came to town and started persecuting and oppressing the Israelites 80 years prior to this moment. And this is for somebody. I know we want a quick fix, and we've been praying for years about certain things, and God ain't fixed it. God hasn't come through on our timing. 80 years after this Pharaoh arrived and did what he did in chapter 1, 80 years later, here is Moses, and God is saying, look, tell my children, I hear their cries. I've heard their cries. That's 80 years. That's 80 years. A lot of people give up on God because they want God to be a genie in a bottle. They want God to operate in their time and in their space because they're distressed, because they're oppressed, because they're going through these situations. A whole generation, actually 2 generations of people have passed on, right? And so God still didn't come through. All right, to my I'm gonna pause right quick because y'all know I'm super pro-black. I don't mean I'm anti-white or anti-brown or anything else, but I'm pro-black. Sometimes we look at our plight here in America. I'm like, man, where is God, right? Like, I know the slaves is like, where is God? We got free, right? Then we had to do it with post-Reconstruction, and we had to do it redlining, and we had to do black codes, and then we had to do it, Jim Crow, and then we had to deal with this, we had to deal with that, and then now we have to deal with this. The systemic racism is in the juvenile and in the justice system, and we got, we just everywhere. It's like we can't get no breaks. Where is God? Like, when is God gonna come through? Individually, we're blessed, but as a collective people, like, where's God? Beloved, God is right there. He's waiting on his Moses, not just one person, his church. Moses is symbolic of the church. He is waiting on the people of God to do what we're supposed to do and stop getting into these frivolous conversations that we have about, certain things like a one song leader or rhythmic clapping or whatever the case may be. Let's get off that. The people in this world need for the people of God to free them, especially our people. Anyway, so let me move on to my story. So God is talking to Moses. He tells Moses, yo, I heard my people's cry. Moses wasn't concerned about the people. Moses was, he was chilling. He was in another level of life. He had a good life, 2 kids and a wife, and had a position in his father-in-law's church, or what he was doing as a Midianite priest. And he was shepherding sheep. He was cool. He didn't want that life. And so God's like, all right, so look, this is what I need you to do. All right, I need you to go and talk to the Pharaoh and tell the Pharaoh it's time to let my people go. And so the first thing Moses does, you guys, I know I'm not reading through the text. This is chapter 3, going into chapter 4. But Moses immediately starts to doubt and have excuses about where God was taking him. He was in this wilderness moment, and God was moving him into a different direction where he was going to take him to the palace of the Pharaoh to have a conversation with policies and procedures about how these people were going to get free. And then Moses started to doubt himself. He's like, well, who am I that I'm going to go and talk to the Pharaoh? Because only a king can speak to a king, right? Only someone in power can speak to someone in power. As children of God, I know oftentimes we feel like we don't have a voice, or we shouldn't be speaking on certain things. But man, you're a king's kid. You're a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. You are the hands and mouth and feet of Jesus Christ. Everywhere you go, the people need you to be able to articulate who you are as a kingdom person. They don't need you to be articulate, but they need you to be able to articulate. And so God's like, look, man, after Moses throws his first list of insecurities out there, God's like, look, that's all good, understand, but you need to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And so then Moses asks the question, well, who should I tell sent me, right? Who should I say sent me? And this is where we get God's, sometimes I call it his government name, but this is his intimate name. This is God's intimate name. So it would be his government name, but it would kind of be like his, the intimate name is like my intimate name is Pokey, right? That's my family calls me Pokey. I'm 48 years old. They still call me Pokey. If you call me Pokey, then I know that we have some history, right? And so this is God's like intimate name, like God know God when you know his name. And so when God says to Moses, I am, tell them that I am has sent you. God is saying I am. That word in the Hebrew in that text is only used right there. When we transliterate it and we take it from I am to Yahweh, what it is in our vernacular, when we take it to Yahweh, it is not the same word. They added the vowels in order to make that word allow us to say that word. But it's YHWH. You cannot pronounce YHWH. You cannot. So they had to have vowels so they could pronounce it. But his name is unpronounceable. With this name, I am, tell them that I am has said, this name means I will be what I will be. It's a verb. We know that names are nouns, right? Persons, places, and things. A noun. I know that much. LA Unified School District. A verb is an action word. When God said that I am, he said, I will be what I will be. It's a verb. God is saying, I'm an action word. I'm about that action, boss. Right? I'm about that action. I'm an action word. I will be what I will be. And each and every moment that I or that you need me to be, or I need to be in a space or a time, I will be what I will be. So when we call on the name of the Lord and we call him Yahweh, that we're saying that God will be what we need him to be in any moment of the stress we're going through. And so him being the Lord is not just him being the boss over our lives, it's him being intimately involved in the details of our lives. And I'm gonna sidebar real quick because I want you guys to be excellent Bible students. When we go to Genesis 1 and 2, in Genesis 1, it says Elohim, right? When you look at God's name, God created, God created, God created. Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. But when God created man and woman, the Bible goes from Elohim to Yahweh Elohim. When God is ready to get his hands dirty, God's like he's willing to be in this fight with you. When he's willing to go through whatever he needs to go through in order to get you to where he needs, he's going to get his hands dirty. He's not just this esoteric God just out there just chilling and watching you go through your stuff without putting his hands on the situation. So he says, tell them that I will be what I will be has sent you. And so we know the story. So he, Moses now is like, okay, well, that's good, man. You will be what you will be. But, I have a speech impediment, right? He started to give more issues. I got a speech impediment. And then, he said, they got the magicians, they got all this, the Egyptians were, bad people. You know what I'm saying? Like they had it going on. They were the Egyptians. And so God started to show him things. He said, take your staff, turn the staff into a snake, take your hand. God has to prove to him while he's in his wilderness, God is proving to him who God is and what God can do. Don't overlook while you're in your wilderness moments to see what God is doing, even while you're going through your stuff. God will show you some things. It won't be the end result, but it'll help you when you get to that other side, because he's saying, I'm preparing you for something, but I need you to know that I'm right here in this moment. Case in point, you guys know what I've been going through these past few weeks with my uncle's passing, right? And homicide, possible homicide, all this stuff. I've been going through that. But simultaneously, because I feel like I'm in a real weird space for myself, but simultaneously, as I'm going through this has been real tough on me. As I wake up in the middle of the night crying, like, man, what's going on with me, God? Like really struggling and trying to stay focused and making sure that I'm diving into my word and I'm not trying to go out there and sin and do nothing stupid, right? As I'm going through that, all these different other doors are opening for me and my family in different spaces simultaneously. So God is showing me, I got something for you. So just go through this. I got something for you. I know you don't understand. I know it's not comfortable. I know you feel like you have a speech impediment, or you can't speak up for your uncle, or you can't. I know. But when you put your hand inside, it'll come out white as snow, because I'm right there with you, and I got something for you. You put it back in, it'll come back, it'll be the same color that you are, because Moses had a little melanin in his butt. Okay, so anyway, so Moses, before he finally says yes to leave his wilderness moment to get on assignment, the last thing he does reiterate to God, like, this speech impediment, I can't speak. I just can't. I'm not going to be able to go before the Pharaoh and speak because of this insecurity of me speaking. And God said to him, and then I'm closing, God said to him, who made your mouth? Who made your mouth? We give God all sorts of outs and excuses, man. God don't need your excuses. Who made your mouth? Who made your hands? Who made the sun? Who made the stars? Who made the ocean? Stop right there. Why are you so caught up on all this small stuff when I created the whole world? Who did that? I made your mouth. And you think God will fix his mouth, right? No, God didn't fix his mouth. He put somebody in position to help him along the way. He said, all right, your brother Aaron, he'll speak on your behalf. But Moses really didn't need Aaron to speak to the Pharaoh. Moses needed Aaron to speak to the people. That's a whole nother story, a whole nother lesson. And so, God, instead of God fixing his situation with his mouth, God provided for him an outlet to be able to walk in purpose, even if he had insecurities. Moses was a very insecure man. Moses had a lot of excuses, but even in his wilderness, with his excuses and what his insecurities, God still said, I have a purpose for you. So I have a plan for you. And so it's not your wisdom, it's my wisdom. It's not what you see, it's not what you've heard. But I've had you out here 40 years because these same people who you're about to go and deliver from Egypt, they're going to come back to this wilderness and they're going to need somebody who knows the terrain. That's my word for this evening. We can go ahead and turn it off, Jonathan, and then go ahead and get started with our questions, comments, concerns. There's so much more to unpack in that story, but hopefully we'll get to it when we talk about through our discussion.